welcome back to another episode of Bear Track Outfitters podcast. I've been a little bit slack in posting. I know I always tell myself I'm going to be a little more diligent, and I have people telling me when the next one's coming out or asking me when the next one's coming out. So I should be more diligent, but too many things on the go at once. So I'll try to be more diligent in the future. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about myths about bear hunting. I'm going to try to dispel a few myths about bear hunting. I've kind of touched on this in the past, but I'm going to go into a little bit more detail today. You don't have to agree with me. That's fine. My opinion is certainly not the be all end all. I take my opinion from over 30 years of hunting bears and 20 plus years of guiding bear hunters. And I always try to pay close attention to what the bears are doing, what the hunters told me the bears did, and just trying to learn at every opportunity I can about the bears. And I think that's what makes good bear guides great, is that they're willing to learn, is that they understand they don't know everything. I certainly don't know everything. I like to think I know a lot, but I certainly don't know everything. I don't think anyone out there does. But I think it's what separates good guides from great guides is willing to learn, willing to let the bear teach you. To every time you have an encounter or you're in the stand or you're baiting, is to try to glean some sort of knowledge, to learn something from that experience. So these are a few of my takeaways, and I kind of picked the ones that I thought were the most common or the most prevalent and went with that. There's certainly more I could talk about, but these ones seem to be the most common. I have a few notes here in front of me, so if you see me glancing down, that's what I'm doing here. As you know, I can kind of get sidetracked. So I want to start off with a story. So years ago, I had put a hunter in the stand. He's one of our repeat hunters. We love having him in camp. We look forward to seeing him every year, but this one particular year, I put him in a stand we called Jug, and we hadn't hunted that bait in probably 2 weeks. We've been baiting it consistently, keeping the barrel full, freshening it up, all that, and we have cameras at every bait site, so we knew bears were there. And so one thing I noticed is that there were multiple bears hitting that bait, but there were 3 or 4 of them that would hit it like clockwork, about 6 to 6:30, maybe 7 o'clock every day. And then they would spend a couple hours there. And I think the smallest one would have been 275, 280, which is a good bear, but out of the 4, that would have been the smallest. So we had 4 shooter bears that were consistently hitting this bait at the same time. So Monday, I'm thinking, yep, I'm gonna put him here, and it's gonna be a good night. He's gonna get a bear. So I put him in the stand and dropped my other 2 hunters off. Fast forward to the end of the sit, I go pick up this one hunter that I put a Jug, and I said, "How'd it go?" So the wind, he told me, was a gentle breeze in his face, coming off the bait into his face all night. You would think, well, there you go, perfect wind. So he tells me that. I'm like, oh, awesome. I look over and I see the barrel still standing. I'm like, okay. So I said, what'd you see? He said, 2 does. That's it. Didn't see a bear. Huh. Okay. Now, to put some concerns to rest, this was an experienced bear hunter. He's an experienced bear hunter. So I didn't put some new fresh bear hunter in this. This was an experienced bear hunter who had killed many bears before. Okay, that's interesting. Tuesday night comes around. I throw him in a bait called camp bait. The wind that night, what he tells me, was from about 4 o'clock all night, kind of blowing this way. He sees 3 bears, and one of the 3, he tells me, he's like, yeah, I probably should have shot that bear. So we get back to camp, and he's like, man, the more I think about it, the more I should have shot that bear. But I'm thinking it's only Tuesday, typical. He's like, oh man, I should have shot that bear. I was like, all right, I'll tell you what. I normally don't do this, but I'll throw you back in that same bait tomorrow night. Okay, fair enough. So that's exactly what I do. I throw him in that bait. And now, Wednesday, the wind is 5-ish o'clock coming, so it's a little bit more towards coming from his back, but not quite. He sees 4 bears, plus the one he wanted to shoot the night before. Doesn't give him a shot. It comes in, but it's kind of behind the barrel. The other bears are just minding their own business, eating from the barrel, and he's kind of behind the barrel, and he never really gives them a shot where he felt comfortable to take. Fair enough. I respect that. I'd rather you wait than wound a bear. So pick him up. He's like, yeah. He says, I saw the bear. Tells me the story. Okay. I said, we can always kind of save that for Friday if we need to. But I'm going to put you in a different bait Thursday. Thursday rolls around. I put him on a bait we call Trapline 3. Trapline 2. I put him on 2. Not that it matters to you, but. So I throw him in Trapline 2, and the wind is at his back the entire night. Every so often he said it would kind of swirl, but for the vast majority of the evening, it was at his back blowing right over the bait. That night, he sees 9 bears and shoots a 340-pound cinnamon. He said, I watched bears all night. So, like I said before, I'm always one to learn and to kind of glean some information. So I look at that whole scenario and I go, You hear people all the time, oh, you got to play the wind. You got to play the wind. You got to play the wind. Well, we did the exact opposite, and that was his best night. Now, the night that was supposed to be prime hunting conditions as far as wind goes, he never saw a bear. Keep in mind, on a bait we hadn't hunted in 2 weeks, that was bears on camera like clockwork. So I go, fascinating. Now, to add to that, I have seen that many times. Many times where if you're a whitetail hunter, you're chasing a big buck, you would not hunt that stand. Yet we kill bears out of it. So that forces me to go, is playing the wind really that crucial? Now, again, some of you out there might go, yeah, absolutely it is. Because I killed this bear and, I only killed him when the wind was perfect. I only hunted when the wind was perfect. But here's the problem with that. If you're only hunting when the wind is perfect, you have no idea what would happen if you hunted when it wasn't. When we're guiding, sometimes we don't have a choice. Sometimes you have to put a hunter in a stand where, it's not ideal. But yet we kill bears anyway. So what I've kind of gleaned from that is, one, I'm fully convinced you will never fool a bear's nose. That I'm convinced of. Secondly, don't obviously you're not going to go in there smelling like gasoline or something, but as long as you're close to a natural scent, and I'll explain what I mean by that in a bit, but I think you'll be okay. You'll hear some people say, well, the reason bears don't mind your scent is because your scent is a part of the whole package of what's at that bait. There's many different scents going on at that bait, and then your scent is just part of that package. Yeah, that's true if you're the only one hunting that bait. If I'm putting a new hunter in that bait every week, well, that package technically changes every week. So then how do you explain that, right? So I think as long as you're as careful as you can be to have a more of a natural scent to you than say a synthetic scent. And again, I'll explain what I mean by that in a bit. But so what I get hunters to do is when they come into camp, I'll have them take their hunting clothes, their gear, whatever, throw it in a pine tree, throw it in the grass, and leave it there. Get your gear to smell like where you are. And so, you know, the amount of hunters I've had who've told me that, you know, when I drop them off even, let's say the wind is perfect. And then they're like, oh, by 7:30, it just started to swirl, which happens. There's nothing anyone can do about that. So it's now, how do you navigate that? What do you do with that information? So I think let's look at the obvious first. Okay. Bear's nose blows a whitetail's nose out of the water, right? And you're hunting this bear at 20 yards, right? You really think a bear's not going to smell you at 20 yards away? Regardless of what the wind is doing? Of course they will. Of course they will. They can smell your scent on the ground from when you baited the day or morning previous, right? Like, you're 20 yards away. So this whole notion of, oh, I'm going to fool a bear. No, you're not. You're not fooling that bear's nose. So you'll hear guys then say, well, cover yourself in vanilla. Cover yourself in berry spray or even guys spray down with scent killer. I don't like any of those options. So the first two, now you're adding a new dynamic to that scent, to whatever you have going at that bait. So for us, we use a certain scent to attract the bears. If you spray down with berry or anise or vanilla or whatever, you are now adding an extra element that they're not used to. And bears don't like change, especially big bears. So you'll hear bear experts talk about this, and they treat it as a one size fits all, which it's not. So, and again, you see this when it comes to bear baiting, right? It's not a universal principle. There's nuances to it. So, in my experience, it's when it comes to scent control, it's not as universal as most people make it out to be. And I'll explain why. So, what you'll have is guys who, let's say, have hunted bear in Wisconsin, Minnesota, Michigan, right? Places like that. They'll spray down with scent control. They'll kill a nice bear or a bear, and they'll go, see, scent control works. That's not convincing enough because there's too many variables. So here's the problem with that. You're hunting bear in an area that is very, very high density in terms of not just bear hunters, but hunters in general. You have your whitetail hunters coming in. You have your small game hunters. You have sometimes houndsmen coming through, right? Depending on the state. So you have, so, and they all use that same product. So now you have that product being used so widely that that's not a foreign scent to those bears. Because next time you spray yourself down with scent killer, it has a smell to it. It does. So now you come to an area like my camp where you're encountering bears that when they lay eyes on you, chances are you're the first human they've ever seen. Our area is so vast and so isolated. They've never smelt that before. So just because it worked for you in Minnesota doesn't mean it's going to work for you in Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Alberta, right? Places where these bears rarely, if ever, interact with humans, let alone smell that scent killer spray. Because like I said, it does have a scent to it. So, you know, the nearest town to my operation is at best 3 hours away. And so these bears are smelling this chemical smell from that spray for the very first time. Let me share a story that I've shared previous, but I'll do it again just to kind of reinforce my point here. We had a bunch of hunters in camp. So I had a group of 4 with me. They're all 4 friends. They didn't want to get split up, so I got it all 4. Fair enough. And one of my guides had 1 guy. Okay. So Thursday night, I pick up my last hunter. So all 4 of my hunters were tagged out by Thursday. And between the 4 of them, in those 4 days, seen a combined total of, I think it was 42 or 43 bears. And like I said, my last guy tagged out Thursday. So Thursday we get back to camp. My guide's hunter had yet to see a bear. Has not seen a bear. So he's asking me, what am I doing wrong? What am I, asking? I said, I don't know. Right? I got my 4 guys I'm worried about. I trust my guide. I know he's doing a good job. He's a good guide. So he starts telling me his process. And he tells me that every day he has a shower with scent killer body wash, scent killer soap. And then he goes outside and douses his gear in scent killer spray. I told him, stop. Go get your stuff right now. Throw it in the grass. Let it sit there overnight. Tomorrow before you go, don't spray anything down. Don't take your shower. Nothing. Okay? It's the last day. Might as well try it, he figures. So he doesn't do any of that. Friday night, my guide puts him in the stand. He sees 4 bear and kills 1. That would be a heck of a coincidence, wouldn't it? So again, to me, and that's not an isolated incident. I've noticed year after year after year that the hunters who treat it as if they're hunting in the Midwest or they're hunting for whitetail tend not to see as many bears because they're using practices that work there, but they're not working here, right? Like I said, that's why I don't believe it's a universal principle. So that's what I glean from that. Try to be as natural to the area as you can. Wherever it is you're hunting, try to smell like that, because you'll never beat that natural smell. I don't care what product you buy, you'll never beat that natural smell. So that would be my first myth. And again, I'm not saying you have to agree with me, but at least consider it. Second one is that bears go into hibernation. That's not true. Bears are not natural hibernators. They're not true hibernators. They go into something what's called torpor. Okay, and what that means is they're not in a coma, right? They'll get up. They'll often wander around. They'll never stray more than 100 yards from the den, but they'll get up. They'll move around. They're not in a coma for all of winter. It's not true. So when a sow at the end, usually mid to end of April, when they start coming out of their den, spring's coming, she will not leave that area, that 100-yard radius of her den. She will not leave that area until every one of her cubs knows how to climb a tree. Once they know how to climb a tree, right, because that's safety. How many times have you seen it, sow with cubs, you got another bear coming in, the sow gives a huff and the bear's up the tree, right? So once all of her cubs know how to climb a tree, now she'll move on. Another interesting fact, I find it interesting anyway, is after a sow has raised her cubs, so usually about 2 years, and it's time to, out the door, she will drive the males off, and then she will leave her area to the females. Why? I'm not really sure, but I think it's fascinating that it's done that way. So, next one, bears are nocturnal. Bears are known as what is a crepuscular animal, which means that they are most active during dawn and dusk. Where you hear this the most is guys come and they go, "Oh, I got this bear at my bait, but he's gone nocturnal." I know what you mean, but that's not entirely true. Now, am I being nitpicky here? Maybe, but bears are not nocturnal animals; they're crepuscular animals. So, when a bear becomes nocturnal, quote unquote, what that tells you is that bear is not comfortable coming to your bait during daylight hours. And there is a gamut of issues that could cause that. But generally speaking, when that happens, it's your bait location. They either have to, either your bait site is too open, or they have to cross open areas to get there. And they just feel safer doing it in the daylight. You could be too far from water, right? All these things. And so a lot of times when people ask, I get emails about this, and that's my first recommendation is find the darkest, thickest spot you can and put your bait there, because that's what bears like. The worst thing you can do is try to manipulate that bear. You'll hear people say play a radio or take your bait out with you, or only put a little bit of bait in there so it forces them to compete. And those are all terrible ideas. Terrible, terrible, terrible. One of the worst things you can do is allow your bait to run empty. When a bear comes to your bait, he needs to be rewarded, right? No matter what time of day, when he comes there, he needs to be rewarded for that. There needs to be something there. So anytime you try to manipulate a bear's behavior, you'll make them uncomfortable. And as I've said before, consistency kills bears. They have to feel comfortable, because everything has to be consistent. And like I said, you'll hear guys say, only have a small amount of bait at your barrel, because that'll force them to come in during daylight. And again, now for one, you're trying to manipulate that bear, which won't work. And I could not disagree more with that statement. Bears have a pecking order. If you've watched enough bears at your bait, you'll realize that there's a pecking order. It's almost as if they've created a schedule amongst themselves, right? Small bears try to avoid big bears. Most bears try to avoid a sow with cubs, as long as it's not in the rut. But outside of that, they don't want the confrontation if they don't have to, right? So a lot of times you'll see bears, or I've noticed, is you'll have the bigger bears come in more towards the end of dark. Not always, but generally. So it's almost like, to put it loosely, almost like they have an understanding. Okay, you go at 6:30, I'll come at 8, right? Kind of. So, but if they're coming there and there's no bait in the barrel, or no bait at your site, however you use, depending on the regulations of your area, well, why would they come back? There's nothing here for them, right? So just keep on being consistent. keep your bait site full. And if that bear's coming at, 10 o'clock, next night he might come at 8. Next night he might come at 7, right? It will change. You just have, the only thing you can really do is you just got to let it play out. Keep doing what you're doing. Keep that baiting cycle, that baiting timing, the bait you're using, the scent you're using. Keep all of that consistent. And you're just going to have to ride it out. That's your only option. So, yeah, my advice, keep that bait full and let the bears work it out amongst themselves. That's really all you can do. Next one. Bears have bad eyesight. So we all know how good of a sense of smell a bear has. So most people now think, for whatever reason, that their eyesight won't be as good. Well, that's not true. In fact, their eyesight is similar to, maybe even a little better than ours. They can see in color, believe it or not. So they have excellent vision in the dark, and they can detect movement far better than we can. Bears are a predator. So their eyes are more similar to ours than they would be to, say, a deer. Their eyes structure is similar to ours, and we look at something in the distance, and everything else is kind of blurry, right? Where, say, a deer, their retina is much wider than ours and of a bear's. Biologists call it what is that term? A retinal streak. And so what that does is it allows a predator to have a much wider frame of view what allows a prey animal, to have a much wider frame of view than a predator. So a deer can look at an object in the distance and at the horizon at the same time, right? They don't have to bounce their eyes around like we do, or a bear does. Our pupils are round. Bear pupils are slits. But theirs open, I'm pretty sure it's twice as wide as ours. So that gives them much, much better vision in the dark. The last biologist I spoke to, his belief was that bears' eyes, it collects about 50 times more light than ours do. So next time someone says bears have bad vision, not true. Which leads me into, what are some of the things as a bear hunter you should pay attention to? Movement. Especially given what we just talked about. Movement will be your killer. This is the most important one. A bear is intensely familiar with their surroundings. If you ever look and you find a trail in the bush, one way to determine whether it's a bear trail or a deer trail is a bear will step in the same spot every time. I tell hunters, the first time you see that bear, he's had you pegged for a long time. They're so in tune with their surroundings that anything out of the ordinary, any movement that shouldn't be there, they're going to pick up on it. So if they're that particular about where they step, how easy do you think it is for them to spot changes in their environment, right? So we've all had it when bears come in and, they walk into the bait and they look right at you. It's like, I know you're there, right? They do. I've heard people say, I don't, when I shot that bear, he had no idea I was there. I've never believed that. I've hunted and guided enough bears that I don't believe that. I just think he doesn't care. He's not going to pay attention to you. They can smell you're there. They smell you walk in. They can smell you. You're 20 yards away. How do they not know you're there? They don't care. So those are just a few of the most common ones that seem to be resurfacing all the time, and there's always debate amongst. My big thing that I always preach is I don't think there's a universal concept generally in hunting, but let alone bear hunting. Because it worked for you in Wisconsin or Minnesota or Maine, that doesn't mean it's going to work everywhere else. There's other factors you have to take into consideration. I would say that there are a few core principles to hunting a bear over bait that you have to abide by, such as using quality bait and making sure that your bait site is always stocked up. But what that quality bait is will be different for everyone. Pastries and meat work for this guy. Popcorn works for that person, which I'm not a fan of, by the way. I'm not a fan of popcorn bait. As I've said before, I know an outfitter who uses corn, kills big bears. We've tried. Bears do not touch it. They will not touch it. I emptied out 57 barrels of corn because a bear would not touch it. So just be careful in making universal, absolute statements. So I hope this helped. I hope it kind of at least gave you something to think about. If you have any questions or if you disagree, I'd love to know. I'd love to hear it. Like I said, my opinion is not the be all end all. It's just what I've gleaned from my experience in the bush. So anything I can do to make your bear hunt an enjoyable one and a successful one, I'm happy to do. So until next time, have fun in the bush.